Hey, good morning. Welcome to Journey Church, at least online. This is part one of Death to Selfie, a brand new series. My name is Jared. I'm one of the pastors here at Journey Church, and I'm super excited to join you guys today. I wish I could meet you guys all, but until we can get together, hey, it's going to be great interacting with you in this environment as well. So let me tell you why I'm so excited about this next series for the next few weeks. We're going to be talking about it. Over the last few months, you, like I, have had to process a lot of cultural change, a lot of different things going on, a lot of challenges. And I've been thinking about this in terms of Instagram. It's almost like you probably don't remember, but do you remember the early days of Instagram? The early days of Instagram had limited filters. I mean, limited things that you could actually use to engage your photos and make them look better than they really were. I feel like in life right now, lots of our filters have been just pulled away from us. I mean, if you guys think about it, we often put our life through these different filters, these pieces of our life, and to make our life feel or look better, like your work. Some of you have experienced this, like you ended up not working for a long time. And some of you may still be not back to work fully, and you're kind of confused about what that means overall. And some of you actually lost jobs. Like to process that, it's almost like that filter of work, that thing that kind of supported who you were and what your life was like, has been pulled out from underneath you, or pulled away, like a feature of your life that's just been negated now and can't be accessed. For some of us, if you're like me, your social connections, like losing face-to-face contact with people. I'll be honest with you, the first few weeks of being healthy at home was very difficult. I was irritable. I was angry. Even though I had my family to talk to, it was really awkward not having people to spend time with. I'm a people person, and not being able to spend time around people taught me a lot about who I am and the things that I kind of depended on and made me who I am. Some of us, just the routine of our life changing kind of threw us for a loop. Like going into the grocery store and not having things that we normally buy be on the shelves, or having to wear a mask, or knowing that some people aren't going to want to shake your hand, or to be out in public and know you should be social distancing, or whatever those things are that threw off your routine. All those things they go internal, don't they? And they make you think about who you are in a different way, maybe perhaps than you did before. And even if none of those things have really attacked you or hit you, I know a lot of you parents, forced to be at home, forced to teach your kids schoolwork. All of us have had to deal with this change of putting parts of our lives together maybe and still trying to be productive in all of them. And some of us have walked away from this going, am I cut out to do this? Like if I have to do this a long term, like what does it say about me if I don't want to teach my kids at home and do school at home? And what does it mean for me if I have to continue doing some sort of hybrid thing where I work some and I do parenting? Like all these questions are brand new. And here's why I'm excited about this series, is because this is a perfect time for us to really dive in and ask some really basic, hard questions about who we are as people, about what really makes us who we are, how we think of ourselves, and how we process who we are as people, as followers of Jesus. Maybe if you're not a follower of Jesus, just how you process what it means to have a value and worth. Because here's what we know about value and worth. I think you guys would all agree that, go ahead and pull up that slide. Value is not any of these things we've been talking about. Like nobody would say that the job you have really determines your value. Because like you being a doctor or a lawyer, or you being a food service worker or a salesperson, none of that defines your value as a human being. Like it may say something about your financial worth, but it doesn't say anything about your humanity, your value, your worth as a human being. And yet, isn't it hard when you lose a job or you lose financial income not to think less of yourself? Like same thing with friends and family. The level of friends and family that you have, whether you're adopted into a family, or whether you have a very large genetic family, or whether you have a hybrid family from two different, your parents have remarried and now you have new brothers and sisters and all this coming together, none of that defines your value as a human being. It may make things different when you go to Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners or holiday celebrations, but it doesn't define you as a person and your value. Same thing with your level of wealth. Like we all would sit down and agree, hey, it's not about how much money you have in the bank that determines who you are or your value or your worth as a person. And yet, doesn't it seem like sometimes we start to rank ourselves based on what our checking account says and what we're able to buy and whether or not we're able to afford these things like vacations and different pieces of our life that we've always seen as normal? And when it comes down to losing some of that wealth, don't we sometimes flip that question around and think, man, does that say something about my worth and my value as a human being? And you're like, no, intellectually, I know that's not right. And listen, those of you who are feeling really unproductive and inefficient because it's hard to work and it's hard to do your job maybe in sales, or it's hard to do your job where you are because of the crisis and the challenges going on in our country right now, that doesn't necessarily mean your value is negated or lowered. And we know this intellectually, but how hard is it for us to reframe all these changes and challenges and not think less of ourselves when things like that force us to look at our value in terms of how we fit in or who we fit in with or whether or not we're going to have a job? It's hard not to internalize that and become a question of value. So I guess my question for us to really start the series is really to kind of dive into this one big question. What is it that defines your value and worth? What is the thing that you hang on to in the midst of a crisis situation, the thing that really makes you work, that defines who you are despite some of these hard circumstances and challenges that you're facing? And so I just want to show you something that's helped me process this. This may not help you at all, but it helps me think through, especially how I try to build sort of this value and worth, this self-identity, this person that I want to be or who I am. And so let me just walk you through a few things that help me. I'm going to use this little diagram. I know this is kind of silly. Okay, just go with me here. Like I kept picturing, like I tried to build my identity and who I am based on the pieces of my life that work. So my politics and how I think about what's going to solve the problems in our country or solve the challenges that we're facing and my answers to what we should be doing next. My politics tend to define how I think and the filter by which I look at all these things in my life. And my politics happens to define me quite a bit. It defines how I think about you and your politics and whether they match up with me and whether or not you're worth maybe having a conversation with, or maybe whether or not I'm going to respond to you in my Facebook feed or whatever it looks like. But politics defines a lot about who I am. In fact, if I sat down to you over coffee and we had a discussion, we might end up at a different area with different politics and different views. We'd also be looking at another area. We'd be talking about our wealth and our status. And we'd be looking at, while I'm not judging necessarily my value overall, it does say something about me, how much money I make or how much I'm able to earn or what I'm able to afford and what kind of house I can live in. And some of you are going, yeah, but I don't live in the nicest house and I don't drive the nicest car and I can't afford to go places that other people are going. And that defines you, doesn't it? Like your lack of wealth or your having lots of wealth, doesn't that somehow frame your identity just a bit? And also look at this next area, your work and success. Like some of you would say, man, I went to school, I worked part-time, or I had scholarships, and I put invested time and money into an education to get here, and now I am a blank, fill in the blank, whatever your education led to. And there's some of you who are watching this going, yeah, but I didn't go to school for this, and I didn't work hard at this, and you know what, I did this, and I was an entrepreneur, I started a business, and I did this, and look, my work and success, I didn't need an education to get there. And so we all kind of fight this work and success thing, and we all have different views, but our work and success does define a little bit about us. Also, our community and our church, like whether or not you help out at Needline or help out at Casa or get involved in civic things within our community, going to church on Sundays or online helps define who you are. It doesn't that in some ways define what you think a good citizen should be or what a good person should be, and you think of yourself as a good person when you do certain things with your church and community. What about your friends and family? Don't the way you view your family relationships somewhat define who you are and your identity and how you think about yourself? Some of you love the family dinners you grew up having every Sunday, and the extended family always gets together and you hang out. And doesn't that piece define you? And while you wouldn't say, oh, people who don't have family are less than me, you definitely wouldn't want to trade with them because you have this identity, this piece of who you are, this valuable thing about you. Your friends and family help define you. And the last piece I want to talk about, and these are not all inclusive, but what about your hobbies and your lifestyle? Like some of you would say you're a runner or you kayak or you're an adventurer or you're a boater or I don't know, whatever you do. Maybe you're a knitter like my wife is, but there's these hobbies and lifestyles that define, your uniqueness and who you are and what you're all about. And so all of these pieces put together, but here's my question. If you look at all these pieces together, what happens if one of these starts to fail or not work? Let's just take, for instance, let's just say that, at work, you're not being productive, sales aren't going well, or things just aren't happening like you thought, or the boss came in and really criticizes the last project you work on, and you start to feel like, man, I don't know what to do about this. Things just aren't working here. But what does this say about me? And what happens? You either dive even heavier into making sure your work gets better and you succeed in that next project or the next sale, and you work, and you tried to build that up, or you cut it off, don't you? And maybe you're thinking, man, well, work's not really what my identity is about. Maybe it's more about my friends and family. And so you dive into your friends and family in hopes that it will balance out and help create this sense of identity and core value and worth, because you're just not feeling it over here. And sometimes don't these areas come in conflict with one another? Like your politics and what you think about what our country should be doing comes in conflict with maybe the friends and family or your church and community. And maybe the ideas you hold politically don't line up with the other people you have neighbors with. And what does that say about your value system or your identity? Or this is really difficult stuff. This is a complex issue. And here's what I'll help guide you to. I want to help guide you into thinking about this, maybe perhaps a simpler and a more straightforward way. And how are we going to do that? Well, here's what I want to do. I actually have some great notes here. The next slide would help us. Our identity is hard to separate from the thing we spend our life and energy building. I mean, that's really the key of this. Like, it's hard when we want to do great at work. And I want you to be a great worker, or I want to have a good community, a good church community. I want to have good family and friends. I want to have strong relationships. I want to have great hobbies, and I want to have a lifestyle that feels good. Like all these different pieces you're working toward. But how do you keep those things that you spend your life and energy on becoming your identity? Because here's what I know about what Jesus taught. While we might ask the question, aren't all of these pieces who I am? Jesus would definitely look at us and say, no. And this is what's so interesting as we read a passage today from Luke chapter 9. What Jesus taught about our identity and how he taught us to think about ourselves and our value and worth is very different than we often practice. Luckily, Jesus makes it super, super clear and super, super simple for us to get. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy to practice. I'm just saying the concept is very clear. And so let me walk you through this passage that you may be familiar with, but will help us understand how Jesus viewed identity, value, and worth, and how we should be thinking about this issue, especially in the midst of a crisis or challenge. So let's take a look at this. In Luke 9:25, Jesus said, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self?" Now, you guys may have heard this concept before, but isn't this interesting? I love this. What does it mean to gain the whole world if you lose yourself in the process, right? And we've heard lots of people talk about this very idea, but think about what Jesus is really looking at. He is putting at odds gaining the whole world and then losing this personal internal value, worth, and identity of who you are. This is what I think is so interesting, because we think of the whole world. When you think of the whole world, I know when I read this and read this for the first time, when I think of the whole world, I think of, the whole world. Like, I'll never own the whole world. I don't have to worry about losing myself. I'm not going to try and be emperor of the whole world. Yeah, but let's think about it. What about my whole world? What makes up my whole world? What am I trying to gain as a making of my world? What am I trying to make me? What am I trying to make of my life and my world and who I become? What if in the process of me trying to make me, I lose me? That's really what Jesus is trying to drive at here. What if me trying to make sure that I have all these things that I want for my politics? Or what if all the things I want for my work and success, the wealth and status that I earn, what if my friends and family and the church community, what if the hobbies and lifestyles, what if I get everything I've ever wanted? What if tomorrow you woke up and the entire political system directly aligned with everything you've ever thought should happen? And what if you woke up tomorrow and you had all the wealth you ever needed or wanted, and you could buy and you could do whatever you wanted. You had complete freedom. And what if you woke up tomorrow and your boss loved you and everything went great at work and everybody was just applauding your would your self-identity, would your value, would everything about you and how you think about yourself, would it go way up? Of course it would. You would begin to feel validated. You begin to like, yeah, that's right. I've been right all along. And what if in the process of that, you realize that getting the whole world, you could actually be in danger of losing your real identity, who you really are? What if there's a fool's errand that we've all come across? And here's what Jesus tries to point out with this verse. Is it possible that you get what you've always wanted and still not be your true self? That's an alternative we've got to consider, right? Because here he puts these two things in opposites. And now we've always thought that if I could just get what I wanted, I would be the me I want to be. But what if Jesus tries to point us to something that's very dangerous about that line of thinking? And here's what I think he tries to do. Let me show you, because I think that, go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. The things you live for do not define you, or at least not all of who you are, right? The things that you really live for and that you're trying to put your energy and life to, those aren't really who you are. Because we said earlier, right? Your value and worth as a human being is not just the job you do, but yet you want to do a good job. And it's not your family and friends, but you want to have great connections and family and friends. It's not your hobbies and lifestyle, and yet you want to have an enjoyable lifestyle. But the things you live for, here's what Jesus says, look, the things you live for are not you, or at least you need to consider that they're not all of you. They're not the core of who you are. So what's the alternative? What am I missing here, Jesus? If you're trying to tell me that I might be missing out on who I really am by pursuing some of these things, then what is it? What is the other thing? What is the thing I should be chasing? What is the thing that does define me for who I am? I want to back up a couple verses in this passage because I actually showed you the kind of the end of Jesus's little teaching here. I want to go back 2 verses to verse 23 and show you how this conversation starts with his disciples. Here's what he says. He said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." So here's what he's saying. He's saying you got to take up your cross. Now, listen, this doesn't mean a lot to us in today's world because at least I know from my experience, I've never actually watched someone get crucified. I've never watched somebody come out into the middle of the public square, grab a big wooden beam, and carry it up to a hill, and for them to drop it on the ground, be nailed to it, and then put it up so that person could die. And yet, this is the visual image Jesus chooses on purpose to explain what it means to be his disciple and to follow him. Wait a minute, Jesus, you're using death language to put my life on the cross, to deny myself and take up a cross daily? Every day I'm supposed to look at myself and what I'm trying to build? And no, not that, but to put that to death and follow you? See, here's what Jesus does. And this is why I think it's so simple. Not easy, but simple. Jesus says, the true picture at the core of who you are and the value and the worth cannot be on what you build. He says, what you build will not be solid enough. If you want a solid core of identity, if you want a solid value and worth, then what you'll need to do is actually stop trying to create yourself. You're gonna stop trying to do the things that are gonna build you up. In fact, you're gonna die to yourself. You're gonna take up a cross. You're gonna deny yourself. Think about what this looks like. To deny yourself, denying myself looks like I'm not getting what I need or deserve. Does it mean I stop working hard? Does it mean I don't try to be good to my friends and family because I just do whatever they want and I don't worry about myself at all? Is that what I'm... Listen, we're going to work out a lot of these bigger questions over the next couple weeks. But here's what I want you to just focus in on today. That Jesus seems to be pointing to something that is not driven by you that will help you be you. And that just doesn't seem possible. Look at this next verse and how he tries to explain it. He says, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it." This is the paradox that Jesus tries to point to. He's trying to get us to understand that sometimes when we try to build our own life based on what we think we need most and what we want ourselves to look like, we often build a false self. We put on filters from Instagram to make ourselves look like something that we're not. And here's what Jesus is afraid of. Jesus is afraid we are going to lose sight of who we really are. He's afraid we're going to lose ourselves. And Jesus loves you too much to let you lose yourself in the process of trying to be something you're not. And so Jesus points out very clearly the way to prevent that from happening. The way to prevent from gaining this whole world yet losing your very self is to focus in on who he is. That to deny ourselves is to give ourselves the opportunity to see something we never would have seen, to see something in our true value and worth that we never would have paid attention to, because we're too focused on these things outside of us, these pieces of ourselves that we believe create the perfect version of me. And Jesus says, no. Whatever you're picturing is not the perfect version of you. I already created the perfect version of you, and I know what it looks like. And the only way you're going to figure it out is to lose your life to me so that you can save it. Now, this is crazy. So I want to give you some examples. Let me ask you this next question before I go into my examples. What good is it for you to gain the whole world? What good is it for you to gain the whole world, yet lose or forfeit your very identity? I know what your answer is. That's not worth it. Nobody wants to lose themselves in the process of trying to gain themselves. You want to gain who you are, your true identity and value and worth from the things around you. So let me just play out some scenarios. Let me give you some examples. Here's one I thought of. Sometimes when you're at work and everything seems like it's coming at you and the boss is being critical and your coworkers just aren't connecting on the project and you're trying to move something forward. You're trying to gain, maybe you're trying to increase sales or maybe you're trying to increase the number of people you serve in your restaurant or whatever it is you look like you're trying to reach and it's not going well. In the middle of this, you know what denying yourself really looks like? It doesn't mean giving up. What denying yourself looks like in this situation is denying what you think success looks like and looking for the validation and worth in who you are from something that you can't build. And that frees you up to do this. What is it I need to do at work that's going to either A, increase my productivity, increase my stuff, I can face the difficult challenge in front of me, or I can honestly face the difficult decision of maybe this is not the right place for me to work. But if I continue to pretend and kind of build this idea of myself at work and what I want work and success to look like and what I want my wealth and status to look like, and if I continue to have this sort of false idea about it, and I think that's who I am, and I don't get the freedom to push that away and find the core of really who I am, and then make some hard decisions about what's next. Maybe for you, it's in your relationship status. I've seen this happen with some younger friends of mine. I know this was part of how I defined myself as a teenager. So your relationship status, whether you're single or you're married or you're widowed or you're divorced, can seem to identify your value and your worth. And it seems to say something truly about who you are. And so for a lot of you, to have this sort of like, I'm single, I'm almost 30 and I'm single. That seemed to say something about your value and worth in society. Or maybe you've been dating for somebody long enough and it's starting to get pretty serious. You've been to a couple weddings with this person and you've taken them to your parents and you've gone to their parents and things seem to work out great. But you get that text message, you get that DM, and it's like, hey, I think we should take some time off from each other and date other people. And for you, it's like a total negating of your whole life. Like you thought this was the relationship that was going to define you for the rest of your life. And your value starts to drop. And listen, here's what denying yourself in that moment looks like. It doesn't mean you deny that maybe there's possibly somebody out there. It just means that maybe the picture of what a relationship, the perfect relationship looks like, or the perfect relationship status looks like, maybe you need to deny that piece and look more to your value and worth about what Jesus says about you than what culture says about you, what maybe your spouse is even saying about you. Like your identity cannot be wrapped up in just one other person. It can't be wrapped up in one relationship. It's not fair to who you are. Your worth and value is more than that one relationship. It's a part of it, but it's not the core. And let me give you one more example. Maybe in your political ideals, you've done the research. You know, you've read it all. You've read both sides and you've come to really clear conclusions and you know the right answers. And yet your sister marries this guy, or your uncle, you know, when you go home for dinner, he's going to have something to say that's completely wrong. Or you're going to have a friend, a coworker that you eat lunch with, and you know if this issue comes up, you're going to have to set them straight, because how could you possibly let them think this false thing? How can you let them then go and think that they're right about this? And in that moment, listen, here's what denying yourself may look like. Denying yourself doesn't mean you stop studying and trying to figure out the right thing. It doesn't mean you stop maybe talking about these issues. What it means is this, is that perhaps maybe you humble yourself and you ask more questions and try to understand where the other person is. Because is your value in that moment how good you are at getting the right answer and how good you are at making sure they know you're right and how good you are at defending your position? Or in that moment, is your value not just in your politics and what you think, but is your value from something else? Is there something else that overrides these areas of our life? Here's what I want you guys to grab. This week, I know this, but here's two questions I want to throw at you. These last two questions. What is it that defines your true value? What is that thing that you know if you lost, you're not sure who you would be? Or that thing that so much hurt to see it pulled away just a little bit during this whole last few months that, man, you didn't realize so much of yourself was wrapped up in that thing. And so much of your identity and value worth was wrapped up in that one thing. What if there's something that is taking your confidence? Because what gives you the confidence to face the change and the challenges of everyday life? And is that thing really the core of who you are? And maybe this week you need to consider that at the beginning of this idea of who you are is something deeper, something maybe even simpler than you made it out to be. Maybe it's as simple as this, that Jesus knows your value and your worth. You don't have to create you. You don't have to build this identity. You don't have to put filters on yourself to make yourself look better. You don't have to have certain things in your life at a certain level to make sure that you're worth something. That doesn't mean you stop working hard, or it doesn't mean you stop caring for other people. It doesn't mean you cut everything out that's going bad in your life. Here's what it means. It means at the center of who you are is something bigger and something larger. And that's really what I want to talk about the next couple of weeks, so do not miss. But for this week, my challenge for you is this, to go home and think about this. What are the things that have been building up your identity that maybe over the past few months have started to cue you in that maybe they're not as solid as you think they are? And perhaps this week, you can find a way to figure out that your identity is not in those pieces of you, but it comes from something else deeper and stronger. So some of you, this is the first time you've really heard this concept. This is hard. This is difficult. This is kind of mind-blowing that Jesus would tell me that me trying to gain the whole world might actually force me to lose myself, that I might lose something, that in order to get my life, I've got to lose my life to him. That's all brand new concepts. But here's what I want to say to you. Listen, Jesus is standing there holding out a hand to help you along. He doesn't want to leave you alone in that. He wants to walk with you through it all. So here's what I'd say to you. As you go through this week and you try to figure this out, don't forget that you have a friend in Jesus who is trying to help you understand that you are valuable, you are worth something, you have a great value to him, despite what everything else in your life seems to be saying. So I want to pray for us. I hope you'll go home and think about this issue. Hey, dive into this teaching in Luke. Take a look at what Jesus says to his disciples. Read some more words of what Jesus says about your value and worth. And next week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how did Jesus decide that he could be confident in the face of all the people who were coming at him and telling him he was wrong. How did he have the confidence and value in who he was to do that? That's what I want to talk about next week. But let's pray, and you guys can have a great week thinking about this issue. All right, let's pray together. Father in heaven, I just want to pray right now for me to just continue to not put things in place of you and what you've said about me, and then I'll stop trying to build this self-image, this Instagram filtered image of who I am, and rather I would look honestly at what you have set up by me. And so, God, I'm just begging you and asking you to help me be freed from these things that sometimes I chase that aren't really who I am. And I pray for the people watching, and I pray for people who are trying to figure this out themselves. That God, rather than maybe thinking themselves lower because things aren't working out, or maybe thinking of themselves higher because things are doing great right now, rather that they have a sober view, like a simple view of their value and worth. That it doesn't come from something they can build. It comes from something deeper. It comes from something greater. It comes from who you said we are. So, God, I pray that we would just bring a death to our selfies, that we would stop trying to build this false image of who we are. Instead, we would just face up that the image that you created for us is the best image we can pursue. And it's in your son's name I pray it. Amen.